Cold exposure is one of the most potent natural stressors that the human body can ever undergo, and thus it provides some of the most drastic benefits that you can possibly ever see through just simple behavior changes like this. So unless you want to touch pharmacology, which can come with a host of downsides, then I suggest that maybe approaching cold exposure or something related to it is going to be the way to go to alleviate some symptoms. So today I'm going to be talking about all of the various benefits that come from cold exposure, but I'll also talk about some of the detriments that come with the territory and how to avoid these possible downsides if you so wish. Now, for starters, I like to discuss the various different forms of cold application that one might want to use. So you can do anything from cold showers to ice baths to cold plunges to cryotherapy to just local cold application. For instance, you could put an ice pack on, or you could just put your hands or feet or head into cold water or something like that to reap all of the benefits. You could even just go out into the cold weather if you wanted to. The important aspect is that you're hitting around 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. That's, I think, 40 or 50 or 60 degrees Fahrenheit for the desired amount of time of around probably about 2 to 5 minutes in any given session. So the important takeaway is to hit that threshold of temperature and duration. And then besides that, it doesn't matter which specific application you use. I mean, cold showers seem to give at least most of the benefits as a cold plunge. So there's really no downside in choosing one over the other. In fact, I think that the biggest discrepancy here is just choose whichever one is most readily available to you, or whichever one fits into your lifestyle or your routine the best. Now, as soon as your body is exposed to this cold temperature, cold stimulus, your body is going to be enacting a series of physiological mechanisms and adaptations. Most notably, it releases the catecholamines, which are epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine to a large degree. Now, epinephrine and norepinephrine are basically adrenaline and noradrenaline, which basically get your body into the sympathetic wing of the nervous system, which has typically been coined as your fight or flight response, which increases your heart rate, vasoconstricts your blood vessels, and it just kind of gets you into a state of action and alertness. Whereas dopamine, as many of you have also heard about, is basically the molecule responsible for the pursuit of something. So dopamine is kind of been coined as a feel-good neurotransmitter, but it actually is responsible for you to be kind of put into a sense of drive and pursuit. So dopamine actually increases by as much as 2.5 times above baseline, which is, to put it into perspective, it is in leagues with smoking nicotine or doing cocaine or another drug of that sort, except it doesn't come with the natural downside that these drugs come with. Since this is a natural stressor, this dopamine increase doesn't have as much of a crash, but it does, however, last for hours afterwards. So it is really, cold exposure really is the true epitome of a natural high. Now, once the catecholamines are released and the sympathetic wing of the nervous system is enhanced, blood from your extremities is also shuttled towards the core of your body to protect your vital organs. And alongside this, the activation of brown fat occurs. Now, brown fat is not to be mistaken with white fat, which is white adipose tissue or subcutaneous fat seen all over your body. Brown fat is stored in very select locations of the body, and it is basically is essentially used to trigger thermogenesis, or the conversion of energy to heat. And the reason why brown fat is activated is to do just that. It is to increase your core body temperature in response to this cold temperature that is bombarding your very organism. So your body is basically trying to counteract this cold exposure effect by tapping into the mitochondria inside the brown fat stores, activating them to burn energy to produce heat. Now, through the act of brown fat triggering thermogenesis, your metabolic rate will increase by as much as 15% and will undoubtedly be burning in excess of more calories. And over prolonged or frequent cold exposure sessions, your mitochondria actually multiply in number in those brown fat stores and become more efficient at doing their job. Alongside this, brown fat activation has been seen to increase glucose sensitivity as well as enhancing glucose metabolism, which can be important in preventing the likelihood of type 2 diabetes to be developed later in life. Another benefit seen with cold exposure is the reduction in inflammation. Now, inflammation is essentially a natural bodily response to harmful stimuli, so it is a protective response. Now, cold exposure inhibits the activation or the enhancement of inflammation essentially through vasoconstriction. If blood cannot get to these important inflammatory areas, then the inflammatory cells are eventually going to die off or decrease in number. Another benefit of cold exposure is improved mood, resilience, and energy. And it's no surprise that these are common symptoms of cold exposure when looking at the neurotransmitters that it produces, like dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. I mean, these are all feel-good chemicals which get your body into an activated state of alertness. Now, I think that this is a great thing if you're having trouble waking up, if you're feeling tired, if you're feeling unmotivated. Hopping into a cold shower or a cold plunge or something like that will just get your body primed and get it ready for the day. I especially like doing cold showers soon after waking because then I'm just much more alert. I feel fantastic. And it really is a snowball effect. When you start your day off with something challenging like a cold shower, then it makes all other challenges that you have to do throughout the day seem much less daunting and much more achievable. So it's really a great way to get your body into a prime activated state and just get yourself disciplined and motivated. And that's another thing. It definitely increases discipline through the act of having to get yourself into that cold water or cold environment day in and day out. That is improving mental resilience a ton. I mean, you are getting so resilient to doing hard things that the next task that you have to do, the next difficult thing that you have to undergo is going to seem like nothing in comparison. The main detriments of cold exposure have to do with inflammation. So while it can be a great benefit to reduce inflammation, you really have to understand the different types of inflammation and how to best approach the application of cold exposure when it comes to inflammation. For example, there are two types of inflammation. There is acute inflammation, which is following vigorous exercise or something like of that nature. And there is chronic inflammation, which is usually due to an injury or something like that. Now, chronic inflammation isn't generally needed all the time, so cold exposure can be a great help to alleviate some swelling and pain in people who have chronic inflammation. However, acute inflammation is a good thing. Acute inflammation can lead to many different physiological responses to enhance your body. For instance, it is used post-exercise to speed up the healing process, deliver nutrients, and just help a robust recovery from the exercise. So reducing inflammation there, while it may reduce some muscle soreness and whatnot, you're not going to be getting as many gains as you would be from that exercise if you hadn't done the cold exposure immersion or whatever form you're using. Therefore, I think it's only a good idea to use cold exposure following exercise if you need to recover quickly for something later on that week or just the next day or something like that. For instance, if you have a really intense training session and then the next day you have some sort of competition, then cold exposure would be a great way to aid in that recovery response and get you primed for the event that you're doing the next day. Where it wouldn't be good for is if you're doing cold exposure post-exercise and you don't have some sort of event coming up and you just want to be able to recover in the best way possible. For example, if you're doing heavy resistance training to build muscular hypertrophy or muscle growth, then following your training sessions with an ice bath, for example, would be a terrible idea because that is reducing the amount of inflammation and blood flow that you are getting to the targeted muscle groups. And therefore, you are not getting as many nutrients and as many gains as a result as you possibly could be. So a good protocol to prevent these downsides of cold exposure is to wait at least 4 to 6 hours post-exercise to do the cold exposure, or do it a few hours before you do exercise. And ideally, it would just be on a separate day entirely to completely avoid these detriments of cold exposure. Now, the protocols for cold exposure are pretty clear. You want at least 11 minutes in total duration spread out throughout a given week, and then you want each session to be around 2 to 5 minutes in duration individually. So, for instance, you could do 6 sessions, that's Monday through Saturday, for example, of 2 minutes in duration per session for a total of about 12 minutes. Or you could do 4 sessions, maybe Monday through Thursday, for example, of 3 minutes to hit 12 minutes. Alongside this, you want the temperature to be cold enough, and this is typically around 10 to 15 degrees Celsius or 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And a good gauge for this is whatever temperature you start shivering at is going to be right for you. Now, keep in mind that frequent exposures to the cold are going to build a natural resilience. So you may have to increase or decrease the temperature or increase the duration over time, or just take some time off in between just to remove that cold acclimation that you will be. So in summary, cold exposure is a fantastic, natural, potent stressor that you can use to increase metabolism, increase dopamine and the other catecholamines, to improve resilience, mood, and energy, to reduce inflammation, and especially, and this is my favorite benefit, to improve resilience and just feel like you can take on the world. So I hope that this video helps you guys and have fun in the cold, or at least try to.